Hello, I'm Jeffrey Allison. I'm Manager of Statewide Programs and Exhibitions at the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts. Welcome to VMFA On the Road, an artmobile for the 21st century. In 1953, the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts created the very first mobile art museum in the world. It traveled throughout the Commonwealth of Virginia from 1953 to 1994, bringing a variety of exhibitions of original artwork throughout the state. In 2018, we brought the new VMFA On the Road Artmobile. In its first 18-month tour, we served over 167,000 Virginians with an exhibition entitled How Far Can Creativity Take You? VMFA Fellowship Artists. Today we're going to introduce you to the second exhibition on board the Artmobile, Virginia Landscapes. Let's go in and meet our Artmobile team, Shakenya Best and Sean Kane, as they look at a variety of artworks in the exhibition and explain how this wonderful program works today.
Hello, I'm Sean with VMFA On the Road. Welcome to the Artmobile, the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts fully accessible mobile gallery. Our new exhibit, A View from Home, Landscapes of Virginia, features 11 works in a variety of media, all depicting scenes from around the Commonwealth. We'd like to give you a taste of what you'll find on board today. While the COVID-19 crisis lasts, we are requiring masks and limiting the number of people who can be on board. Today we'll be practicing social distancing, but when you visit in person, we'll have our masks on. So come on in and view A View from Home, Landscapes of Virginia. The first work we'd like to focus on today is by George Johnson. Tailor, tenor, postman, George Johnson held many jobs throughout his life, but he was always an artist. Born in 1888, he began painting at the age of 5. As a teenager in Richmond, Virginia, he worked as an elevator operator, but took the opportunity to sell handmade postcards to his patrons. Seeing his talent, his employers asked him to illustrate advertisements for the newspaper. His career in art took a detour when he attended Hampton Institute to train as a tailor. After graduating, he worked as a singer in New York City and plied his trade as a tailor in New York, Hot Springs, Philadelphia, and Richmond. Back in Virginia, he entered the Postal Service, took correspondence courses in art, and in 1918 became an editorial cartoonist for the Richmond Planet, the city's leading African-American newspaper. His cartoons, many which featured the evils of segregation, the importance of education, and the trials of African Americans during the era of Jim Crow were reproduced in papers throughout the world. In 1948, he created a series of greeting cards featuring Ethiopians from antiquity to promote pride in African Americans' history. As a painter, he focused mostly on biblical and historical subjects, but he also created still lifes and landscapes. Idol of Virginia Mountains is one of his most expressive. The viewer is put high up in the Blue Ridge Range of the Commonwealth, and with loose strokes of turquoise, violet, gray, and brown, in places peach pigment suggesting the glancing rays of the sun, he has created a scene that is both universal and specific. In 1945, Idols of Virginia Mountains became part of the permanent collection of the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts, making it the first work by an African-American painter to be purchased by the museum. George Johnson said he wanted to render pictorially anything that would help him and others see truth, beauty, and to think.
Hello, my name is Shakenya Best, and I am one of the coordinators for the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts Artmobile. Today I will give a portion of the virtual tour on the Artmobile. of 2 of the artists out of the 11 that are exhibited in A View from Home, Landscapes of Virginia. My first artist I will talk about is Miwako Nishizawa. Miwako Nishizawa is a Japanese-American artist who now lives in California. She studied art in both Japan and New York. Nishizawa was invited to Virginia by Japanese art collectors Renee and Carolyn Balser to do a project called 12 Views of Virginia, which became a Virginia Museum of Fine Arts exhibition in 2014. The project started in 2009 and lasted for 5 years. Inspired by Kawase Hasui, woodblock prints in the 1920s, she traveled all around Virginia sketching and taking pictures of landscapes. Nishizawa says, Virginia's natural colors are similar to those in Japanese landscapes, which makes woodblock a fitting medium for a series. Her artwork in the exhibition is titled Cape Henry Lighthouses, and it's an edition of 50. This is number 4. The medium is woodblock print, ink and color on paper, and it was completed in 2014. We see the original large Cape Henry lighthouse from 1792 and the newer 1881 lighthouse constructed 350 feet from the original one. There is a circular sweep of the newer lighthouse lamp. The storm is represented by diagonal lines across the entire print, and we see a pattern of turbulent ocean waves. This scene is located in the northern tip of Virginia Beach. This print follows the traditional Japanese practice of having seals and signatures. There are 4 here. There's the artist signature, artist seal, and 2 sponsors' seals. Ukiyo-e means pictures of the floating world, a traditional style of Japanese woodblock print popular during the 17th through 19th centuries. It captures social life and daily life of common people, famous theater actors, courtesans, city life, and landscapes. It's divided into 2 lines. Shinhanga is the direction Nishizawa follows. For the 12 Views of Virginia, she is the sole creator and printer of the entire series. It took her 2 to 6 months to complete each print. In order to hear more and see Nishizawa talk about her print process, more landscapes, and the Japanese tradition of printmaking, go to VMFA's YouTube channel to see her interview.
The next work we'd like to feature is by George Harvey. Scenes of the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad and the Chesapeake and Ohio Canal at Harper's Ferry, Virginia. Thomas Jefferson visited Harper's Ferry in 1783 and said the scene was worth the voyage across the Atlantic. English-born artist George Harvey made the voyage in 1820 when he was 20 years old. According to his journal, he spent the next 2 years in the far west, in the remote wilds of the New World, hunting and trapping, writing poetry and prose, and drafting and sketching. By 1827, Harvey settled in Brooklyn, New York, working primarily on portrait miniatures. In 1834, he moved from the city, purchased land in the Hudson River Valley, and designed and built a cottage. He also redesigned the home of his friend and neighbor, Washington Irving, author of The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. He would later write that while engaged in this architectural work, Harvey began to notice and study the ever-varying atmospheric effects of this beautiful climate. I undertook to illustrate them with my pencil and commenced a set of atmospherical landscapes. Over the next several years, Harvey depicted North American landscapes from Virginia to Canada, focusing on the effects caused by atmospheric conditions at different times of the day and year. This image, done around 1837, shows Harper's Ferry's massive rock bluffs that loom above the meeting of the Potomac and Shenandoah rivers. Harvey's inclusion of the passenger train adds significance to the canvas. This is one of the earliest American landscapes to picture a railroad. Used to the fine detail that portrait miniatures required, Harvey's rendering allows us to identify the locomotive leading the train as the Arabian, a vertical boiler, grasshopper engine built for the B&O Railroad. Known for his watercolors, this work is also distinctive because it's one of the few surviving examples of his work in oil.
Brian Palmer is a Richmond-based photojournalist who studied photography and worked in New York. He is known for prominent publications. He received a Peabody Award in 2019 for his work on the radio story, Monumental Lies. Brian believes in telling stories with pictures that may not otherwise be told. His artwork in the exhibition is an untitled digital photograph of the Evergreen Cemetery. It was completed in 2017. What we see in this landscape is a section of the 60-acre cemetery that shows it overgrown with kudzu, which is a vine weed that smothers other plants, trees, and stops it from receiving sunlight. This photograph is an example of the challenges Brian Palmer and volunteers face to restore and reveal the burial markers and graves within the entire cemetery. Evergreen Cemetery is a historic African-American burial ground that reveals African-American history and community of many who were born enslaved. Founded in 1891 because white cemeteries in Virginia were closed to African Americans and didn't desegregate until the 1960s. Evergreen fell into disrepair by the 1970s. In 2017, Enrichment Foundation purchased the property and began facilitating the restoration. All 60 acres is in the city of Richmond. It is the resting place of Maggie Walker, first African-American female bank president, and John Mitchell Jr., editor of the Richmond Planet newspaper, one of America's first African-American newspapers. Sean talked about George Johnson, whose artwork is also exhibited in the Artmobile. George Johnson worked for John Mitchell Jr. He created souvenir and editorial cartoons for the newspaper. To learn more about Brian Palmer's endeavors to restore East End Cemetery, another African-American burial ground next to Evergreen Cemetery, go to eastendcemeteryrva.com. To volunteer for his organization, Friends of East End, go to friendsofeastend.com. If you want to hear an interview of Brian Palmer talking about the history and the projects of the cemetery and learn more about his photography strategies and styles, go to VMFA YouTube channel.
We hope you enjoyed this virtual tour of VMFA On the Road, an Artmobile for the 21st century, and our newest exhibition, A View from Home, Landscapes of Virginia. We want to take this opportunity to remind you to visit our website. We're always adding new content in support of this exhibition, new videos, new make and takes, a lot of material that you can use during this time. We also look forward to bringing the truck to a community near you when possible. Please take that opportunity to come and visit us in person and see the artwork up close and real. And remember, please stay safe and wear your mask.
I started taking pictures, or as we say now, making pictures when I was in my teens. And initially, I think I was using the camera as a device to separate me from the world. And I realized that when I'd look at the pictures that I'd taken in that mode, I did not like them. I really wanted more a feeling of intimacy and connection, but I was afraid. And over the years, I taught myself to get closer, to open myself up. But when it got here, I think I reverted to that mindset, that the camera would be my buffer between my heart and this tragedy that I was immersed in. We are now in Evergreen Cemetery, and this is a 60-acre burial ground. Right next door is East End Cemetery. They are separate spaces, and yet the same community is buried here. African Americans, freedom's first generation. My wife and I have been volunteering as cemetery restorers, removing invasive species and finding headstones that have been buried under dirt for years and years, decades in fact. We've focused a lot on clearing the areas that you can see from the road, obviously, and then pushing back and pushing in. And we've also responded to relatives who have come to us and said, can you tell us where our grandmother, our grandfather's grave is? And if we can't, we'll try and figure out where they are and do what we can to clear that space. I would hear people say sometimes, it's a shame the state that this place is in. The subtext there was, these Negroes can't take care of their stuff. If you know the history, if you know anything about Jim Crow, if you know anything about how funding worked in the state of Virginia, with the equivalent of about $9 million going to fund Confederate cemeteries, and if you figure out how much money went to African American cemeteries, state money, it was about, zero. These places fell into disrepair. Churches, burial associations, they just couldn't keep up. So we had public investment in private spaces, private Confederate cemeteries, which we still have, and we had no investment in these private spaces. That's kind of political, but it's real, and it's something that I think about a lot when I come out here. I don't think my pictures got real and interesting until I got close to this powerful history. And that's when I started slowing down. I experimented with slow shutter speeds, faster shutter speeds. Instead of obstruct with the camera, use the camera to capture stuff that I saw only when I slowed down. There was a part of Evergreen that would periodically become overgrown with kudzu. And then people would clear it out, and then the kudzu would come back. And that was, to me, terrifying, because the kudzu hadn't and still hasn't reached East End. But I thought, whatever can we do to stop this? That particular picture was on a day kind of like this, so a little bit murky. And I think that's where you get those greens that really kind of pop out. These 16 acres in particular have held my interest for so long. Whatever political environment we're in, I understand now what it means for me to be American, to be connected to these people here. No one can tell me that I need to go here or go there or go home or go back to Africa. This is mine. And you cannot dismiss the experiences of my ancestors who tried to carve something out of this country for themselves and for others, and they did. You can't erase that.
I received a phone call from René Borser and his wife Karen Borser. And he said he and his wife looking for a Japanese woman who can do Japanese woodblock prints and travel around in Virginia. When I received the call, I just immediately said, yes, thank you. I want to do that, yes. So that's a starting point of this big journey of 12 years of Virginia. I learned a lot from Kawase Hasui's prints, how to put the motif and how to compose the scene as one great composition. It's because of the nature here. The color is so similar to the Japanese nature color, like deep blue mountains. And that is so suitable for Japanese woodblock. The woodblock printing is process-oriented. First, you sketch and transfer the sketch over the transfer sheets and put on the surface of the block and then transfer that. And then you cut. Cutting is taking the most time. Then print. Because we are not use press, the hand pressing, so there is a lot of trick you can use. Japanese woodblock prints started from early 1600, genesis of ukiyo-e. It was only one color. And they discovered Kento registration, which is a technique of putting registration mark on a block. And then keep the registration mark so that they can do multi-color printing. At that time, so many people involved, so they actually have a cutter and also printer separate from the sketch artist. And then the Western art coming in, and then people are so fascinated by the Western way of drawing scenery and landscape. So Japanese woodblock become two major lines, and one is called Shinhanga, which is kind of take over the ukiyo-e way of printing. And then another one is called Sosakuhanga, which is creative woodblock printing. The artists enjoy cutting, also printing. Now contemporary artists, it's more mingle and put it under the big umbrella called mokuhanga, which is woodblock, Japanese woodblock. I love Japanese woodblock printing is because there is so many way of using the technique. Some people saying Japanese woodblock is a collaboration with watercolor pigment and water. Water is such a difficult but interesting the substance because like a so subtle difference, you can print totally different image.
In college, I had access to the college darkroom, and for the first time, I really got to make pictures, I had a 35mm camera, and develop them in the darkroom. And then I was lucky in my second year, I think it was, to be hired by the Richmond newspapers as a stringer. And they also would kindly critique my work. They would say, for example, that negative was a little bit thin, a little more exposure on that, or you might have done that picture a little differently. Very kind, but nice suggestion. So that was very helpful. So I remember it was 1978, and I asked my wife for a Christmas present. I wanted a Calumet view camera. After I was playing with my camera for a while, my wife said, there's an envelope over there too you might want to look at. And it was the application to study with Ansel Adams, one of his workshops in Yosemite Valley in the summer of 1979. I went, it was 10 days in Yosemite Valley, and it was just wonderful. We learned a number of techniques and things to overexpose, underdevelop, a number of ways where you could stretch the zones, if you will, and the tones on the film and then on the paper. I sort of had come to the point where I realized Ansel Adams had this special place, and that's where his pictures were. And I had been to the Shenandoah National Park a lot, but hadn't really tried to make it my place, if you will. Then I decided, okay, I've gotten this information, I've got a 4x5 view camera, so I started going very regularly to the Shenandoah National Park, and I photographed there for the next 20-some years. Several of the pictures that are among my favorites I took just because I was there. One in particular it was a morning, it was cloudy, and I knew there might be good clouds sitting on top of the mountain. And it looked like the clouds were kind of moving or something was changing in front of me. It was foggy as a dickens, but things looked like they were changing a little bit. At about the time I hit the place where the Appalachian Trail crosses the Skyline Drive. So I pulled the car over and put my stuff on, and I said, I'll just walk along in the fog and see what happens. And I hadn't gone but several hundred yards before. It's a wonderful place where the trees are sort of over the trail, and the clouds were breaking up behind it. So that was a little dark, but behind it was this light. And so I set up and made that picture. And again, I didn't intend to go make that picture. I was trying to do the kind of thing that Ansel Adams did, and that is go walk around in this place that was very special to me and see what I could find. And I think it was 1987. I went up, I said, it's kind of clearing and the sky is going to be a nice blue and there's some nice clouds there, and I'll see what I can do. And I hadn't been on the drive very far before I saw at Baldface Mountain Overlook this silhouette of a tree, and the valley was well lit and the sky was blue with nice clouds, and I made that picture, and it's a nice picture. Interestingly, something about it looked familiar, and I looked through my negatives and I found that 7 years earlier I'd taken what I still think is a lovely picture of this tree when it was alive. Early on, after I'd been making pictures for 5, 6, or 7 years, I got a cardboard box, and I put book on the outside of it. And every time I got what I thought was a good picture, I put a copy of that picture in that box. And by 2002 or 2003, I thought I had a pretty good batch of pictures in that box. I had a friend who knew Eileen Mott, and I called up Eileen and I asked her if she would come look at my pictures and see if the Virginia Museum was interested in doing anything. She looked at my work and said, we'd like to do a traveling exhibit. And it was wonderful for me as an artist. I think there are 20-some pictures in the total exhibit, from small ones, 8x10s, up to ones that are 30x40 in the frame. And I think it went 15 or 20 places, and it was wonderful. I get to go to those places and oftentimes give a talk, but I got to meet people, but people all over the state got to see my work because of Eileen Mott and the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts. And at the same time, I went to see the University of Virginia Press, said they're doing an exhibit of my work that's going to travel the state, and you need to do a book of my work. So in 2003, the exhibit from the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts started in Charlottesville at the same time that my book, Shenandoah Views of Our National Park, was published. So I was very lucky, and that really, my luck there starts with Eileen Mott and the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts for looking at my work, for sharing my work around the state, and giving me a good in when I went to the University of Virginia Press, and I could point to Virginia Museum of Fine Arts as a reason they ought to publish my work.